So this is about choosing the right collaboration tool within Microsoft 365. So we're looking at the kind of the main tools you have here of Teams, SharePoint, and Yammer. So understanding what they all do and how to choose the right one, and how to encourage people in your organization to actually use them as well. Of course, is something that we're focusing on today. So our first panelist, I'm going to bring her in, is Kat Greenham. Can you hear me, Kat?
Yes, I can hear you fine. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm good, and you?
Yeah, I'm really good. I'm enjoying the sunshine we've got in the UK at the moment.
Oh, great. So Kat is a Microsoft Office 365 MVP and Microsoft Solutions Specialist. Is that right?
I am, yes.
Good. And Kat is also a contributor over at petri.com and has lots of great articles about Viva. So if you want to check them out, then please do. Right, who else have we got? Who's up next? I think Jasper.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, and you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Also enjoying the sun.
Good. It's already dark here in Prague, but well. So you're a Microsoft MVP and modern workplace consultant.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Great. And who have we got next? Steve Goodman. Everybody knows Steve Goodman.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and you?
Not bad. It is warm here. I've had the window open and the dog has been barking.
Okay.
But I'll make sure she doesn't for the next half hour or so.
You've got a very colourful background behind you today.
I do, yes.
Yeah. Steve is also a Microsoft MVP and Principal Technology Strategist for Content and Cloud.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Okay, great. And last but not least, waiting in the wings is Peter Rising, also a Microsoft valuable professional in Office apps and services. Hi, Peter. How are you today?
Hey, Russell. I'm good. How are you?
I am good, thank you. All right, so we have just under half an hour to. Oh, and Paul Farrott. I shouldn't forget Paul Farrott. Everybody knows that he is sitting at the top there.
Last and least.
Yep, so okay. I'm going to start backwards, okay? And what I would like to know is, and I think a lot of people would like to know, is what is Yammer, and why doesn't Microsoft talk about it very much? Who would like to go first?
Yeah,
who wants to be on the hook for that?
Yeah, I don't mind taking that one.
Okay, Jasper, it's for you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Well, I think Yammer is like a communication platform. I think it's built upon communities. So if you have like a company and you want to have like an informal place where you can chat and share information about certain topics, it can be work related, but I think it works best if it's non-work related. Yeah, I think it's a great service for that. I think it does what it should do. I think the last couple of years, Microsoft was very loud about it because they made a lot of changes look and feel wise and new features wise. And I think maybe the last year has been a bit quiet because I think they're more polishing it instead of releasing big new features. Yeah, but on the other hand, Teams is kind of like that takes the stage, right? So I think that's why it seems like there's not much happening. But I think they've done a lot of great work over the last few years. But in my opinion, it's more communication services that are not really collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe it's my mistake in thinking that Yammer doesn't get a lot of attention. As you said, maybe it's just overshadowed by Teams.
Yeah,
of course.
A little bit.
So, Kat, you just said it's probably a mistake that you use Yammer. So, am I right in thinking? Am I right in thinking that it's on public record now in the history of the internet?
I know.
So
I won't be using that tag again.
So, am I right in thinking that it's like Facebook for the enterprise?
I guess that's kind of how it's been described before. It's like social media for business, is how I kind of describe it to customers. And I think it definitely has its place. Yammer is not dead. And with obviously the increase of using Teams, and now we have Viva, it has been overshadowed. But if you think about the integrations that Yammer's getting to something like Viva Connections, and even top, there's conversations within communities of Yammer are being kind of picked up by those tools within Teams. It's still a good part of the stack. It still has a place within Microsoft. And I think if you can think of it as, I guess Microsoft, we would seem that it's not talking about Yammer as much, but I think it definitely still is in the suite. And if you think of your outer loop, your inner loop, so you have kind of Teams as your inner loop, it's your place where you get stuff done. Yammer's your outer loop. That's where you're going to post questions that are, aimed for the company, the entire organization. And just one thing I would say to get people enjoying Yammer is it can get rid of company-wide emails. And I think every organization likes to get rid of those. We can use Yammer, which is a more appropriate tool for that kind of communication.
Okay. What about you, Steve? Do your customers have any dealings with Yammer?
Oh,
Not really.
absolutely. There's different types of customers, but certainly large enterprise customers have always seen a need for being able to get large distributed teams to be able to work together when they might go into little silos. But the user research that you do with customers on these larger projects is often talking about how they're sick of being on all these distribution groups, how they don't know what one part of the business is doing. And some of that might drive SharePoint usage and intranet usage and better communications tools. But some of that might be breaking down the barriers. But just yesterday, I went to London to an in-person meeting in an actual room. And the COO of a large international firm sat down and said, the biggest problem is, and you probably have seen the same thing, that people aren't talking across different parts of the business where they would, but where they might have a conversation in a large office between different departments. And I think Teams has worked really, really well in giving us an asynchronous place where we can go and chat, but it is a little bit harder to break the boundaries between teams, especially when you don't know people and you need to get to know them. But communities is the thing that Microsoft have been mentioning, which is Yammer. And I think everything Kat said is absolutely spot on about the way that Microsoft see this and how you should see this, that outer loop being the people outside of your direct team or team that you're working. So I don't really need to, I just agree with all what she said.
Okay, Peter, do you want to add anything? Or have we pretty much covered it?
No, I mean, I'm sort of the person who you could describe as, historically, I've been the Yammer skeptic over the years that I've been working with Office 365. I've never quite seen where it fits in. And ironically, I'm working at a company now, which is the first place I've ever really worked at that's really using Yammer. So I'm using Yammer probably the way it's meant to be used for the first time in my experience with it. So I'm starting to see a lot of the stories that can be told with it, and a lot of the use cases that you've all mentioned here. What I would say is I wouldn't miss it if I didn't have it. Is where I will leave it, and I will I'll be diplomatic and leave it there.
But why is that? Because it doesn't fulfill any role, or because it works terribly, or
no, it actually works well. It does what it's meant to do. I just don't find myself gravitating towards it. It is very good for social interaction, but if I didn't have it, I think I would find other ways of achieving that. So
I would. Sorry to interject, but I would say that Peter worked at the same place as me for a while, and it was where we had a bit of a lull. Companies all came together, and content and code, the company I worked at, were massively into Yammer because we were doing it with loads of enterprise customers as quite a niche partner. And then as we merged with the group, there were people that didn't really get Yammer. So you didn't have Yammer when you joined where I worked because we hadn't really relaunched it. And didn't you feel like you didn't know everybody in the business? We were quite stuck at that time in our own little teams. And I missed it because I'd seen it work well, and it had helped me as a remote person connect with people. So I think when you see it work really well, or perhaps if it is working okay for you, you'd probably miss it more than you think.
Yeah, there needs to be a business case for it. I think that's the most important. Yeah. Yeah. And if what Steve says, that's the power of it, that you connect these people in different branches or countries or departments, I think that's excellent for it. But if you don't really have a business case for it, it's just not going to work. And that's
what I do appreciate is that it does seem to work very effectively in those larger enterprises where senior leadership teams want an effective way to be able to have that one-to-many experience. So it's good for that, obviously. But the social stuff, I mean, where I work now at CPS, we use it for lots of things. Like there's a showing off category, sort of what you've got up to at your weekend, and there's things like sport and Formula One and football and that sort of thing. So it's really great for that. I have to admit, I still don't think I'd miss it. But the only way I could, maybe I need to go cold turkey from Yammer. Maybe I need to just not use it for a month and see if I'm impacted by that. I don't think I would be, but it's interesting. I do take the points that you make.
What you're saying that you'll miss, though, is the culture, the company culture. You're up in Newcastle, you're working away, you're not in the office. And so you will, I think you would miss that culture piece of being connected with everyone on a social level. Maybe you wouldn't miss Yammer as its kind of form, but you would probably miss that, bit of culture and connection that you have with your colleagues, is what I would.
Maybe so. It's an interesting. You've got me thinking this could be an interesting experiment to try to go cold turkey from Yammer for maybe a month and not participate in it. Now that I've started using it over the past 3 or 4 months in this role that I'm in, I've got used to it. Would I miss it if I don't use it? I think that I feel a blog post coming on here.
Well, Kat and Jasper have got those two key things. One, the culture. In that conversation, CEO to COO. They were talking about the culture of the organization. That's the thing that's driving the business case for some of these Yammer deployments at the moment. They need that culture. They need that, as they say, connective tissue between staff. And that's what Yammer's for. That's the business case at some places. Small organization, you probably don't need it because 100 people could probably talk in an all-company group and that'd be fine.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to the other two big technologies, and that's SharePoint and Teams. So there's a lot of overlap between those two technologies. I mean, obviously Teams is based on SharePoint, but should organizations choose one or the other, or it's not an either or?
When I saw what we were going to talk about, I thought there's going to be a lot of similar opinions here, which is it's not an either or at all, really, because obviously you've got Teams, which is this thing that brings together, it's not just built on SharePoint, it's built on other things as well. It's built on Skype, it's built on all the different components. Without one, without SharePoint, there's not really a lot in Teams. But there's absolutely going to be a case where you're going to use both, depending on what you're doing.
I think pre-pandemic. Oh, sorry. I think
go
I've got a bit
ahead.
of a lag.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Everyone's delayed, but so I think pre-pandemic, what I found is the customers were making the decision to use one or the other, more so using SharePoint for their files and not using Teams. That especially in the first couple of years when Teams was released. Now it's become a sort of they're a kind of package that go together. You'll very rarely find a customer or an organization that's just using Teams and not using SharePoint for the file collaboration aspect. Even if they're not online, if all their stuff's on premise, they're still using SharePoint to collaborate on files within Teams. So I would say pre-pandemic, yes. Nowadays, no, you're typically going to be using both. So yeah, I agree with Steve as well.
Yeah, what we see is that on one hand, you have the SharePoint communication sites. Those are really used for more formal communication, like news items, public documents, and a real collaboration that takes part in Teams, and in combination with SharePoint, of course, because you need story files there. So that's where we see the divide. So yeah, it's not either or. You can use both, right? So the communication sites are perfect for intranet scenarios. And the collaboration, that's really Teams in combination with SharePoint. What Steve says, you also have the other products, right? The planner and a couple other ones as well.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, before Teams became as monstrous as it is now when it was still developing. I used to say to customers back then that as a general rule of thumb, I would suggest SharePoint for the static departmental content in organizations, the content that's never going to change, like sales, marketing, HR, that sort of stuff, and maybe policies. Whereas Teams, from a file point of view, I might have suggested for shorter term projects with a shorter life cycle. But I think as Teams has grown into what it's become, now being a 5-year-old product, I think it's I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think it's what works for each individual organization who's adopting it, and understanding that as consultants and architects that we all are going into an organization, that's where you've got to pitch your discussions to begin with. Understand the pain points of that business, what they need in order to be able to work and serve their customers, and what tool is going to be the best fit for them. And it's going to be a combination of both of those things sometimes. So I have no preconceived notions anymore about that. I think it's inevitable, as has been said, that Teams has its claws into everything. It's got Exchange Online ties into it. SharePoint is obviously there, OneDrive, and there's lots of app integrations as well. So, and we've got Viva now, as has been said. Yammer is serviced in there now. So that's one of my go-to phrases. There's no right or wrong. It's finding out what works best for you as an organization.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So there are lots of, we've been speaking about this throughout the whole conference today with Paul and some of the other presenters. There are obviously lots of applications in Microsoft 365 that also get integrated into Teams, like Planner and lists that we've just been talking about, and how they can all be integrated using Power Platform. But do you think IT could do more to promote their use? So I get the feeling that a lot of people maybe don't really know how to use them and how they can integrate with applications like Teams. And do you think this is something that IT should do in terms of promoting their use, or is that somebody else's responsibility?
I think it's a business challenge overall. I think IT is a very broad term in this day and age, and a lot of things do get pigeonholed as the IT team's responsibility in organizations. Compliance is a thing that I do a lot with. That's an example of it's perceived as an IT problem, and it's really not. It's a business-wide problem. So it feels a bit unfair to say that IT teams could be doing more, because IT teams, the different flavors of those IT teams that inevitably will be in various organizations, they're usually under a heck of a lot of pressure and don't have the time that they would probably like to be proactive rather than reactive and look at all this new technology and evangelize it. The problem also is, in my experience, that nobody listens to us techies. When you're in an office environment, before pandemic times, when we were working remotely, if you sat in the canteen at lunchtime, jabbering on about how excited you are as a techie about this latest feature, people in sales and marketing and all those other people in the organization, they generally just roll their eyes. No, here he goes, geek, going on about it. If you can get other people evangelize,
this might be a you problem, Peter.
It very possibly
I'm
is.
just pulling it. But pre-pandemic, we used to send people out dressed in bright coloured t-shirts with teams on, with balloons and a big team sign and big displays, and those wouldn't be people. Well, it could be someone from IT, but it's a different role within it. But I see sort of there's many different variations, and because I don't like saying it depends, as I'm sure none of the other consultants on the call like saying, but you've got smaller mid-sized customers so you've got an IT department, there's an IT team, but in a smaller business, you often find that the people who are looking after IT know the people in the business very well. They may, they've worked together. They could be married to somebody that works there, all sorts of things. They know how the business works. They know the right people to speak to. They've built trust directly with those team leads over that time. But in a much larger business, then it is very difficult for IT to have that role, because as you said, I was joking, obviously, Peter, but when and I've been in this position myself, I've had it difficult to get out of. When you're behind the scenes and you are are not doing the user support anymore, but you're thinking about how the technology is going to work for them, then you're quite detached from that. So you end up needing that business change and adoption layer, which may sit inside the IT function. It may not. It may involve your communications teams. Some have this as a function inside of IT. Some build a structured team that includes a product owner who's looking after Microsoft 365 as a product, thinking about what it can do for the business. And they may or may not sit inside IT, and they're different to the person thinking about the technical side of this. Do we use direct routing or do we use calling plans? That's a different conversation too. We've got a challenge in the business where people are trying to manage mini projects. Should we launch banner or lists for them? What will work better for them? And that's more of a problem for a specific function inside a large IT team. I think there's not a right or wrong answer, but fundamentally, yes, somebody has to be thinking, well, showing people what they don't know. Because once people see it, once you get champions out there in the business, then they can take that message on if it's good. But that they shouldn't be expected to explore these tools and work out how to use it in different ways in pockets.
An exercise that we do that kind of helps. So the idea, I think, with adoption change management, to get people to use technology, I don't think it solely sits with IT. I think IT are involved. But typically you would have key sponsors, so your stakeholders who can influence the organization. You would have your project team, which could be the communications team. It could be project managers, that product owner like Steve was talking about, and then some of the IT team. And then you would have your champions, who would typically, as Steve mentioned, be those who are maybe wearing the t-shirts. And nowadays on Teams, we have little badges, champion badges that we can kind of add that spread that message. But an exercise that we do that's quite useful is actually, instead of saying, how do I get people to use lists, is we do a use case scenario discovery session, and we try to get different areas of the business to sit in a room, HR, finance, sales, operations, whatever it may be, and we kind of go through, what's your problem now? And what does success look like for you? What would be the solve for that? And it might not be lists, that is the solution, but it will likely be something in the Microsoft 365 stack, but it's starting from, what is it you need help with? And then how can the technology solve that? Because with the application side of Teams, there's so many apps available. Just saying which one's the best, I don't know anybody who's gone through and tried them all. Fair play if you have, but that's a better way of approaching it, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with what everybody else said. I also think IT should be more of a facilitator in this case. They should be facilitate that Teams is available, it works, and they help champions, for example. What they can also do, for example, is create like a support portal where they provide more information about Teams, the possibilities it has. But yeah, I don't think it will work if IT goes out there and say like, hey, you have lists or other integrations, isn't it great? Because yeah, again, you need like a business case for it, and they can know about everything, what everybody needs.
They don't do everyone's jobs. Although they do a lot.
You've got to solve user needs. You've got to solve problems.
Yeah.
But there is that other side to it where working with larger customers, businesses where they've got the time and people to invest in doing that or getting the right help in. That is different to where it might be one person who is responsible for Microsoft 365, VMware, a bunch of other stuff, the old phone system, maybe the LAN, all sorts of stuff. And they're a generalist, but they're not going to be able to get budget of $20,000 or something to get the right expertise in, nor are they going to be able to get somebody in as an additional employee, at least immediately to work on this as part of the team. So if you're in that gap where you know the business well, you know what they need, you're effectively working as a consultant to the business, you're understanding their pain points anyway, then that's where you're probably going to wear, you're working on a team, but you're going to wear another hat when you're thinking about the problems, much like if you were helping the finance director decide on what would be the most suitable finance system to buy on the market. It's driven by those same sort of needs from the business.
Okay, great. So we've just got a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask one more question. So when we're considering these different technologies, of course, we need to understand what the business use case is. And I think we've established that there's no right or wrong answer necessarily. But are there any complexities in terms of managing these solutions from day to day that people should think about before they adopt something like Yammer, for instance? If Yammer is designed for very large organizations, this is something that they can manage in a small organization as well.
Does anyone want that one?
Don't just throw it over the fence. It's obviously one thing. Get the governance right. Team sprawl is a thing that people hit. Microsoft 365 group sprawl. I think Tony Redmond wrote about it when he was writing for Petri in the past as well. It's always been a big problem, hasn't it? Where Microsoft do want people to be able to self-serve. That is important, but there might be a life cycle that sits underneath it. Getting some of those bits right is important, I think, before you get the baseline there and then build on a good platform.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's what we always do as well. We always start with like a governance. Make sure you have a governance strategy in place. Ideally, before you start with teams, you can always do it afterwards as well. And make sure you have an adoption and change management strategy. I think if you have those two in place, you have a lot of higher rate of success. But yeah, I get Microsoft's always pushing the self-service. I understand it, but the reality is a little bit different.
I'm sure the sponsors of the event will be very pleased if you end up putting files all over the place in SharePoint and need a tool to move it all back into the right places. But you won't, because it'll be a nightmare for you.
All right. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for the discussion. So I think that there are no easy answers to this. Being able to choose between these different things, of course, they all serve different purposes depending on what your business use cases are for them. Of course, you need to carefully consider which you choose and how you govern them and how you manage them going forward as well. Great. So I'd like to thank each of the speakers, so Jasper, Steve, Peter, and Kat, and Paul. Thanks for joining us for this roundtable. Hopefully we'll be doing many more of these as we go forwards with conferences throughout the year.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.